She was dominating the most prestigious tournament in tennis. The crowd was on its feet. The cameras were capturing every angle. And then, in the middle of her match, a WTA official approached the court. The umpire stepped down from the chair, the players paused, and the world watched in disbelief. Eala had just made history, the first Filipino to win a Wimbledon singles match in the Open era, a dominant 6-1, 6-2 victory over Renata Zarazua, 22 winners in an offensive-minded match. A flawless 16 from 21 at the net, the sea of red, white, and blue had erupted. But her historic performance had drawn attention, the kind of attention no one expected. Whispers began circulating through the All England club. Officials had spotted something on the 21-year-old's attire. Something that didn't sit right with Wimbledon's famously strict all-white dress code. A detail that, according to tournament rules, might be a violation. The 1 centimeter rule. A single trim of color around the neckline or cuffs cannot exceed 1 centimeter. Any visible undergarments must be entirely white. And if an official sees a player wearing more color than allowed, they will request an outfit change. The umpire stepped off the chair, a WTA official approached the court, and the tennis world collectively held its breath. Was Eala about to be disqualified over her outfit, or was this something far more calculated? The sea of red, white, and blue was everywhere. Packed into every corner of Court 12 at the All England Club, thousands of Filipino fans had turned the most prestigious tournament in tennis into a home away from home. They waved their flags. They chanted her name, they roared with every winner, and at the center of it all stood Eala, a 21-year-old from Quezon City who was about to do something no Filipino had ever done before. I was really surprised, Eala would say after the match. Well, the Filipinos keep surprising me in good ways. She had drawn Filipino fans wherever she competed on the WTA tour, seemingly turning almost every city into a home tournament. But even she wasn't prepared for what she saw when she walked onto Court 12. I know how notoriously difficult it is to get tickets to this event, so to have what I would call a full house of almost Filipinos is amazing, she said. I never would have thought that at Wimbledon I would have like a home crowd, so super thankful, and I really enjoyed that. Standing across the net was Mexico's Renata Zarazua, the world number 75. 2 years earlier in the quarterfinals of the Cari Tennis Classic, Zarazua had defeated a 19-year-old Eala in 3 sets. That loss had stung. But this was a different Eala, older, stronger, more experienced. Seeded 29th in a Grand Slam for the first time in her career, she lived up to her billing. From the very first point, Eala came out firing. She struck first by breaking Zarazua's serve to take a 3-1 lead in the opening set. The 6th game of the first set saw 7 deuces before Eala finally broke Zarazua to build a commanding 5-1 lead. She added another break to close out the set 6-1. The second set was more of the same. Eala broke early again to lead 2-0, broke for a 4th time in the 5th game, and comfortably closed out the match 6-2. In just 1 hour and 17 minutes, she had dismantled her opponent. She struck 22 winners compared to Zarazua's 11, created 17 breakpoint opportunities, and converted 4 of them. She faced just 2 breakpoints on her own serve and saved them both. It was a performance of pure, unadulterated dominance. When the final point landed, the stadium erupted. Filipino flags waved frantically. Tears flowed, hugs were shared, history had been made. Eala had become the first Filipino player to win a Wimbledon singles match in the Open era since 1968. I'm very happy with my first round, Eala said. I think that I played really well and kept the intensity throughout the whole match, so I'm hoping to keep this momentum going throughout the week. But as the celebrations continued, something else was happening behind the scenes. Whispers were circulating through the All England Club. Officials had spotted something on the 21-year-old's attire, something that didn't sit right with Wimbledon's famously strict all-white dress code. A detail that, according to tournament rules, might be a violation. The umpire stepped off the chair. A WTA official approached the court, and the tennis world collectively held its breath. Wimbledon is unlike any other tournament in the world. It is the only Grand Slam played on grass, the only one where players are addressed by their titles, and the only one that enforces a strict all-white dress code that has stood for over 6 decades. The rule is simple in theory. Competitors must be dressed in suitable tennis attire that is almost entirely white. But in practice, it is a minefield of technicalities that has tripped up even the most experienced players. White does not include off-white or cream. A single trim of color around the neckline and cuff of the sleeves is acceptable, but it must be no wider than 1 centimeter, 10 millimeter. Any solid mass or panel of coloring is strictly prohibited. Color contained within patterns is measured as if it is a solid mass of color. Logos formed by variations of material or patterns are not acceptable. And the rule applies from the moment the player enters the court surround, not just during the match itself. The strictness extends to every item of clothing: shirts, shorts, skirts, socks, shoes, headbands, wristbands, even shoelaces. Visible undergarments must be entirely white, save for a single trim of color no broader than 1 centimeter. The only exception allows female players to wear solid, dark-colored undershorts, a rule change introduced in 2022 after years of controversy. The history of this dress code is as fascinating as it is strict. It was introduced in 1962 after American player Gussie Moran caused a scandal in 1949 by wearing a dress that revealed her lace-edged panties. The all-white rule was designed to minimize the visual impact of sweat stains, which were considered improper and unsightly in Victorian-era tennis. Former champion Andre Agassi famously boycotted Wimbledon from 1988 to 1990 specifically because of the dress code. In 1985, American Ann White wore an all-white one-piece lycra bodysuit onto the court, a rebellion that pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable. In 2014, the tournament found itself at the center of a storm of controversy after several female players were reportedly instructed to remove bras that breached the strict dress code. It took 8 more years, until 2022, for Wimbledon to ease its restrictions on women's undershorts. And just days before Alex Eala's historic victory, another player had already fallen foul of the rules. Jessica Buza's The World No. 52 received a stern warning from the umpire after her black undershirt became slightly visible on her lower back towards the end of her first-round win. A problem here is that they are very strict with many things, Buzas told Movistar Plus Deportes. I think it was a bit of black here, and you can't do that, so I will have to sort it out. Even the defending champion was not immune. Jannik Sinner, The World No. 1 admitted after his first-round match that he had feared being removed by tournament officials for breaching the all-white dress code. The BBC Wimbledon panel were left taken aback by his potential violation. The scrutiny is relentless, the rules are unforgiving. And as Alex Eala basked in the glory of her historic victory, she had no idea that the officials were already watching her closely. Something on her attire had caught their attention. Something that, according to the tournament's notoriously strict guidelines, might be a violation. The umpire stepped off the chair. A WTA official approached the court, and the tennis world collectively held its breath. In the midst of the celebration, there was something else that had caught the eye of the Wimbledon officials. Something small, something delicate, something that carried the weight of a nation. Nestled in Alex Eala's hair was a custom white hair tie adorned with a single Sampaguita flower. The Sampaguita is the national flower of the Philippines, a small white blossom with a sweet fragrance that has been a symbol of Filipino identity since 1934. For Eala, it was more than just an accessory, it was a love letter to her homeland. A reminder of where she came from and everything that brought her here. The hair tie was a gift from Nike, one of Eala's longtime sponsors. The brand had been with her since 2019, outfitting her through every milestone of her career. And now, as she prepared to make her mark on the biggest stage in tennis, they had given her something deeply personal. The Sampaguita hair tie was a one-off gift, not for commercial sale, further fueling its symbolic value. In a handwritten message accompanying the gift, Nike wrote, "Every dream begins as a seed. Kung may tinanim may anihin, and what you plant you'll one day reap." A Filipina on the grass courts of history, not just playing for herself but carrying a nation in full bloom. Eala shared a close-up of the hair tie on Instagram, writing, "The Sampaguita, the flower of my country. A reminder of where I come from and everything that brought me here." She ended with a line in Filipino that resonated across the nation, "Bit ko sa bawat gala, I carry it with me in every move." Nike women replied, "The bloom has just begun." The post drew over 125,000 likes and more than 700 comments, with fans rallying behind her not just as an athlete, but as a symbol of national pride. It was rare enough for a Filipino athlete to debut on Wimbledon's center court. Rarer still to do so with such a clear cultural statement, but as beautiful and meaningful as the hair tie was, it also raised a question: did it comply with Wimbledon's notoriously strict all-white dress code? The rules were clear, the hair tie was white, the flower was white, but the guidelines also stated that there should be no solid mass or panel of coloring. And the Sampaguita, though delicate, was a three-dimensional embellishment on a hair accessory. The officials had to be sure, the players had to be held to the same standard. And if Eala was going to continue her historic run, she had to be in full compliance. The umpire stepped off the chair, a WTA official approached the court, and the tennis world collectively held its breath. Was Alex Eala about to be penalized for celebrating her heritage? Or would the officials see the hair tie for what it truly was, a symbol of a nation's pride, worn by a young woman who had already proven she belonged on this stage. The umpire stepped down from the chair. The crowd's roar faded to a confused murmur. A WTA official, accompanied by a tournament referee, made their way across the pristine grass of Court 12 toward the players' chairs. The sea of red, white, and blue fell silent. The cameras zoomed in. The tennis world held its breath. Eala stood at the baseline, her racket still in hand, her expression shifting from triumph to confusion. She had just made history, the first Filipino to win a Wimbledon singles match in the Open era. The crowd had erupted, the flags had waved, the tears had flowed. And now officials were approaching her court. Something was wrong. The WTA official spoke quietly to the umpire, who then turned to Eala. The conversation was brief, but the tension was palpable. Eala nodded. She listened. She said a few words in return, and then the official gestured toward her hair, the Sampaguita hair tie. The custom white hair tie, adorned with a single Sampaguita, the national flower of the Philippines, was a gift from Nike, a tribute to her roots and rising legacy. It was a one-off gift, not for commercial sale, further fueling its symbolic value. Eala had worn it proudly, sharing a close-up on Instagram with the words, "The Sampaguita, the flower of my country," a reminder of where I come from and everything that brought me here. But Wimbledon's all-white dress code is among the strictest in all of sports. Players must be dressed in suitable tennis attire that is almost entirely white from the moment they enter the court surround. The rules extend to every item of clothing and accessory: shirts, shorts, skirts, socks, shoes, headbands, wristbands, and even shoelaces. A single trim of color is permitted, but it cannot exceed 1 centimeter in width. Any solid mass or panel of coloring is strictly prohibited. And the Sampaguita, though delicate and beautiful, was a 3-dimensional embellishment on a hair accessory. Was it a violation? Had Eala unknowingly broken one of Wimbledon's most sacred rules? The official examined the hair tie closely. The cameras captured every moment. The crowd, still confused, began to murmur. Some fans looked worried, others looked angry. The tension was unbearable. Eala stood calmly, her composure unshaken. She had been through worse. She had faced 4 championship points at Eastbourne and watched them slip away. She had carried the hopes of 115 million people on her shoulders. A dress code inspection, however intimidating, was nothing compared to the weight of a nation. And then the official stepped back. Whatever had been said, whatever had been examined, the verdict was clear. Eala's hair tie complied with Wimbledon's rules. It was white. It was tasteful. It was a symbol of pride, not a violation of tradition. The official nodded. The umpire returned to his chair. The crowd erupted not just in relief, but in celebration. Eala had passed the test. Her heritage had been honored. Her moment had not been stolen. But the incident had exposed something deeper, a tension between tradition and identity, between the rules of the past and the players of the future. A young woman from the Philippines had just shown the world that she could carry her culture onto the biggest stage in tennis without breaking a single rule. And in doing so, she had sparked a conversation that would outlast any match. The official had stepped back. The verdict was delivered. And in that moment, something far more significant than a dress code ruling had taken place. The Sampaguita hair tie had passed inspection. It was white, it was tasteful, it was a symbol of pride, not a violation of tradition. But the incident had exposed something deeper, a tension between the rules of the past and the players of the future. Between the traditions of Wimbledon and the identities of the athletes who were now carrying the sport into a new era. Eala had worn the hair tie not as a statement of rebellion, but as a love letter to her homeland. The Sampaguita, the national flower of the Philippines, holds deep cultural significance. It is a symbol of resilience, of quiet strength, of a flower that blooms even in the most challenging conditions. Nike had given her the custom white hair tie as a one-off gift, presented in a box styled like a mini tennis court. The handwritten note that accompanied it read, "Every dream begins as a seed. Kung may tinanim may anihin, and what you plant you'll one day reap." For Eala, the hair tie was more than an accessory. It was a reminder of where she came from and everything that brought her here. She had shared a close-up on Instagram, writing, "The Sampaguita, the flower of my country. A reminder of where I come from and everything that brought me here." The post drew over 125,000 likes and more than 1,700 comments, with fans rallying behind her not just as an athlete, but as a symbol of national pride. But the inspection had raised a question that extended far beyond the court. In a sport that has long been dominated by Western traditions, where do players from non-traditional tennis nations fit in? How do they honor their identities without violating the rules of the sport they love? Wimbledon's all-white dress code is among the strictest in sports. It was introduced in 1963 to minimize the visual impact of sweat stains. Over the decades, it has become a defining characteristic of the tournament, a symbol of its commitment to tradition and decorum. But it has also been a source of controversy. In 2014, female players were reportedly instructed to remove bras that breached the rules. In 2022, the tournament finally eased its restrictions on women's undershorts. And in 2026, just days before Eala's match, another player had received a warning for a visible black undershirt. The Sampaguita hair tie had been deemed compliant, but the incident had sparked a conversation that would outlast any match. Could Wimbledon's tradition evolve to embrace the diversity of the players who now compete on its courts? Could a tournament built on the traditions of a bygone era find a way to honor the identities of athletes from every corner of the globe? Eala had shown that it was possible. She had carried her culture onto the biggest stage in tennis without breaking a single rule. She had proven that tradition and identity could coexist. And in doing so, she had become a symbol of something far greater than a tennis player. The Sampaguita hair tie had passed inspection. But the legacy of that moment would endure far longer than any tournament, because Eala had reminded the world that champions don't just win matches, they carry their countries with them. They honor their roots, and they show the next generation that they too can dream, no matter where they come from. The sea of red, white, and blue had erupted. The Filipino flags had waved. The cheers had echoed across the All England club. Eala had just done the impossible. She had become the first Filipino to win a Wimbledon singles match in the Open era. A dominant 6-1, 6-2 victory over Renata Zarazua, 22 winners. A flawless performance on the biggest stage in tennis. But as the celebrations continued, something else was happening behind the scenes. Whispers were circulating through the All England club. Officials had spotted something on the 21-year-old's attire. Something that didn't sit right with Wimbledon's famously strict all-white dress code. The umpire stepped off the chair. A WTA official approached the court. And the tennis world collectively held its breath. Nestled in Eala's hair was a custom white hair tie, adorned with a single Sampaguita, the national flower of the Philippines. It was a gift from Nike, a tribute to her roots and rising legacy. A handwritten note accompanying the gift read, "Every dream begins as a seed. Kung may tinanim may anihin. And what you plant, you'll one day reap. A Filipina on the grass courts of history, not just playing for herself, but carrying a nation in full bloom." Eala had worn it proudly, sharing a close-up on Instagram with the words, "The Sampaguita, the flower of my country. A reminder of where I come from and everything that brought me here."